Yeah, we up in here. What's up? It's Freedom Day. Happy Freedom Day
Yep.
to all you freedom following people. It's 250 years of freedom. Happy 4th of July. If you're not in America, I'm sorry about your luck, Chief. It's not my fault. Should have been born in America and not wherever you were born at. And then you could be free too and have freedom, but you didn't. So that's not our problem. We're just uncanny folks getting uncanny. As always, I am the supreme host, the CEO, the owner, the one who runs the show. It's me. It's uncanny. It's Robert Solomon. With me is a guy wearing a shirt with a dinosaur on it because he's ancient. He's old. He's an old man. He wears old man clothes now. He doesn't wear those hip youngster kid clothes no more. He threw them away. He said if it ain't about the dad swag, he don't want no parts or no things about it. So you know what that is. Next to him is Steven, who looks like he hasn't slept in 6 months. Are you sleeping? You don't sleep no more? You probably don't sleep no more. He don't
Yeah.
sleep no more. You know, he don't sleep no more. He stopped sleeping. He's in that new sleep experiment. This isn't even real. Your sleep
The
experiment has
Russian sleep
created us.
experiment.
It's the Russian sleep experiment. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is America, so you have to go back to Russia for your
I'm cool with
experiment.
that.
Because, yeah, you're going to have a blast. Literally. You're going to have a blast because all the technology is there. So.
I look forward to seeing the monsters you see when you don't get any sleep.
Oh, listen, bro. If anybody's gonna see those monsters from not sleeping, it's gonna be you. Like you are that person in the friend group that's gonna see all kinds of things and creatures and goblins and ghouls. Anyways, gentlemen, how are we doing? How are we doing?
I'm here.
Doing well. Hanging
All
out,
right.
listening
So-
to about 1,000,000 fireworks outside right now.
Yep.
Yeah, and I could be outside watching them. But no, I said, you know what? I'm gonna be here. Be here hanging out with the crew. Anyways, gentlemen, let's get started. We're doing some little 4th of July paranormal. I'll be your moderator tonight. I'll be asking some questions and getting some concerns, comments, and all that other Jupiter jazz. Spider, why don't you go ahead and go first? I already know what you're going to talk about. I think I already know. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I know. So go ahead and hit these people to your amazingness.
Well, what we're doing is we're telling some stories about paranormal things that have happened in the history of this great country, specifically things of a more patriotic nature. So it's not just random ghost stories from the middle of Arizona or something. And so I looked into it a little bit, and I wanted to pick something that I hadn't heard about before. And I'm going to ask the two of you if you have, and then after I detail everything, we're going to get into some discussion about it, about whether it's a real thing or what we might think it was. And it is the vision at Valley Forge. And like I said, I hadn't heard about this. It's not something completely unheard of. I guess it's a legend, an American legend that people tell over the years that may not be true. And we're going to get into that. Before I get into the details, though, have either of you ever heard of the vision at Valley Forge? Steven, I'm going to start there.
No, I have not.
All right. Rob, you were nodding your head. I take it you've heard about this before.
Yeah, I've heard about old George Washington and his shenanigans and what he saw in the angel and all that. So.
Well, that's cool. I hadn't heard about it, so I'm excited to present it. The history about this. Let's get into a few facts first. Now, I got the details of this from a website called iands.org, and they're a website that deals with near-death experiences, like the scientific aspects of it rather than like the spiritual thing. So it's kind of a weird thing for them to have this story, but I guess somewhere in the past somebody asked them, do you think Washington had this vision because he was having a near-death experience? Now, we're not going to get into that part of it because that's not what the story is about. Their conclusion is probably not, because there's no evidence of that, but it was an interesting question. If you want to read up how I read up about it, you can go there, iands.org. Excuse me. Now, Valley Forge, of course, was a camp that they had in the Revolutionary War. It was in Pennsylvania, and it's 20 miles west, well, it doesn't say west, it's just 20 miles from Philadelphia. They were camped there because the British had invaded and taken over Philadelphia, which had been the capital of the colonies at the time. Congress had fled westward to York, Pennsylvania, and so George Washington was leading this camp of little freedom fighters over Valley Forge. It was horrible, horrible conditions. It was the middle of winter. A Pennsylvania winter is not a pleasant place to be outside in the wilderness. 2,000 soldiers would go on to die at Valley Forge without ever seeing combat, just because of the weather, the disease, the starvation, all that kind of stuff. So it was a rough thing all the way around. There's other stories you can get from Valley Forge, haunting stories, all kinds of stuff. It was that kind of a grim outlook. But this specifically, according to the legend, George Washington, who, of course, for people who don't know, was our first president of the United States, he was alone in his tent, deep in prayer and reflection, when he became aware of a strange presence. A mysterious figure of a beautiful, glowing woman introduced herself as a messenger from God who presented Washington with 3 visions. Now, the first 2, I could be like, okay, the story kind of makes some sense. The third one kind of makes me wonder, oh, I think somebody's kind of hyping up the patriotism a little bit here. But the first vision was of the Revolutionary War, which they were in the beginning stages of. George Washington saw a panorama of America's war for independence and the eventual triumph of the American colonies. Okay, I could get behind that. Even if it's fake, it's something to kind of get people like, hey, yeah, he saw we're going to win. We can do it. It's inspirational. The second vision was supposed to predict the American Civil War and the eventual restoration of the Union afterwards. And the third vision, where it kind of gets a little bit off the track for me, it showed a global cataclysm where nations from the world, around the world, rose up against the United States. The United States was invaded and overwhelmed. There was chaos everywhere. And on the brink of defeat, celestial beings came to the aid of the Americans, and they managed to prevail against the rest of the entire world. Now, that part kind of is one of those things, like, to me, it was more somebody writing something down that was like, hey, well, here's, obviously, we're American and we're going to beat everything. We'll beat the entire world if we have to. Ha ha, that kind of stuff. But that's my personal interpretation. And Washington allegedly heard a mysterious voice afterwards proclaiming that while the stars remain, so long shall the Union last. Before I get into the validity of any of this, about whether we think it's true or not, what do we think about the vision? It is definitely interesting. Rob, what do you think? What is this, something that you would have expected to happen during the Revolutionary War to anybody, even just a random person other than George Washington?
If we go back far enough, things like this have happened all the time. I think it doesn't need to be just George Washington. I think this happens before. This happened with a lot of other leaders in other times. So I don't think it's far off from the track. It's not like this is the first isolated incident of somebody talking about something like this from the past. So I think it's just par for the course.
How do you feel about the way that the 3 visions are? Like, the first 2 are markedly different from the third one. But I mean, that might be hindsight on our part looking back. But what do you think? Do you think they're still all connected, or do you think that third one feels kind of tacked on?
I mean, it reminds me a lot of the Third Secret of Fatima, how it feels very just like forced. Like it didn't fit with the other 2, just like the Fatima didn't fit with the other 2 as much. So it's almost like maybe somebody else went in and wrote that after the first 2. They're like, let's make it sound fanatical. I still think it's possible, though. I still think they could have seen something like that. Who knows? I think it's up to speculation and up to conjecture on trying to piece together the whole thing, I think.
Stephen, same set of questions, same dialogue. What do you think? Do you think it's plausible that this be something that somebody around that time might experience? And again, how do you feel about the third prophecy's relation to the other 2?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and bring the quantum observer effect into this with quantum mechanics and say that, it's completely likely that, every individual has their own experience on reality interpreted by their brain, as science says. So it's entirely possible that George Washington thought he saw this or, whatever, experienced it in his reality, however you want to word that. But what it really reminds me of more than anything else is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It was three visions, and he had three visions of Christmas, and this was three visions of them winning the war, essentially. So it
And that third
feel
one is kind of like a
yeah,
disaster one, unless you change your ways. I
yeah.
can kind of
It
follow
it
that.
kind of
That
feels like a Christmas Carol to me.
maybe somebody was reading up on their Dickens before they put this together. Gonna get the
Yep.
Dickens. Um, Here's the thing about all of this. It's super interesting. Now, again, this was back. Supposedly, this happened between 1777 and 1778. So, like I said, it was a couple years into the Revolutionary War. Some things about George Washington is that apparently there's no record of this written down anywhere
Man.
from before 1880, which is the first time that this was
Mhm.
talked about. George Washington had a reputation for being a note taker, for being very fastidious, for being very observant, and for taking many, many notes on things that he saw, experienced, or felt, or thought. And having something like this not be present in things that he himself had written is kind of suspect. Um, Going to where it was actually first appeared, which was in the National Tribune in 1880. It was 15 years after the end of the Civil War, and the story allegedly came from an old Continental Army soldier named Anthony Sherman, who supposedly told it to publisher and journalist Wesley Bradshaw. Now, there's two things wrong with this. First, there's no record of an Anthony Sherman serving with Washington in the army at the time. Now, that might be able to be overlooked because there were a lot of people, and then a lot of people, maybe it was somebody who had died at Valley Forge, and this other person took the name to commemorate them and was speaking under a pseudonym. Um, but the individual Wesley Bradshaw, who was the publisher and journalist, that wasn't his real name. That was what he wrote under. He was a different person who I had his name. Now I can't find where my notes were about it, so maybe I didn't save it. But apparently, as Wesley Bradshaw, he was known for making heavily um, inspirational stories that were not particularly factually correct. Um, he was very well known for coming up with things that were meant to get people to rah, yes, America, and be happy about their military and be happy about their leaders and all kinds of things like that. But he didn't often have a lot of nonfiction, if you know what I mean. So there's several knocks against this story. Now, all that being said, is it possible, as that one of my favorites from Ancient Aliens would say, wouldn't it be possible if the story was still true somehow and we just did not have a record of it for whatever reason? Maybe it just passed word of mouth. Maybe Washington didn't write it down for a specific reason. Um, what do you think? How accurate do you think it really is after the fact?
So honestly, I think it's something that it's all conjecture. Let's be honest here. It's all conjecture. You can't. There's no proof to it. It's a he said, she said sort of thing at that situation in 1776. It's late. It's early Americana. You know, a lot of stuff gets lost in translation. A lot of stuff's probably gone from history that we'll never see. So honestly, I mean, it's a fun topic to discuss and you know go over. You got to have some anchor to something. Now, like you said, the his fellow soldier could have probably been real. There's a lot of people that served. So it's not to say that that person didn't exist, and it's not like they could keep great records back then. Things get destroyed, things get lost. So I think it all still ends in conjecture, though, no matter what. I don't think it's anything that you can do about it. I think it's just something that is more conjecture than anything else.
Steven, what do you think?
I agree with Rob on this one. I think it's just something that was completely made up because someone wanted to validate their personal beliefs. So they just made up a story about a greatly well-known political figure of some sort that was very popular at the time, said something that validated their beliefs. So there you go.
And I think what it does come down to is knowing the journalist who wrote about the account and how often he would make stories specifically to stir up patriotic feelings in people and make you feel good about your country. I get why he would have done that, but it also definitely throws a lot of doubt on it. I like the story. It's an interesting story.
It is.
And I'm sure there are a lot of other stories similar to it. As Rob mentioned in the past, all throughout history, we've had visitations that may not happened. We've had different messengers that may or may not have shared prophecies with people. But I think for the period of time it was, the United States was still new. It was still growing. They had just come out of the Civil War. So, relatively speaking, it was 15 years ago before this was written, and that wasn't a huge amount of time. So, they were probably still trying to bolster the people to be like, "Hey, you know what? Remember George Washington? He was a great stand-up guy. He was the best president we ever had," because they'd only had a few at that time. And he had this vision that we're strong, that we're American, that we're this and we're that. And I think that's what it comes down to. It is a fascinating story. I hadn't heard it before, and I'm glad I looked it up. But in the end, I think that's all that it is. I think it is just a story, a good one, but a story nonetheless.
So where do you think the wires got crossed? Do you think there could be another story to this and they just embellished it? Do you think it could be a metaphor for something? Do you think it could be um, correlating to the times? Maybe almost in code, maybe almost in some form of secret acknowledgement, treating other countries that have tried, like England, like foreign invaders, treating them like aliens, so to speak. And so somebody just said, you know what, we're going to throw this in code and throw it out there and just see what people say.
I think it's very likely that it was meant to be inspiring, that they took two events that had already happened for sure and said, "Oh, yeah, of course we were going to win those because this is America. And we do that because we stand together and we're the United States. And that's why we win. And if there's this future battle coming off later on, we're going to win that too. And this is how it's going to happen because we can stand against anybody." And I feel like it was definitely appealing to a lot of the average people that may have been kind of wondering about with the direction of where the country was going. You see a lot of that stuff today. We have a lot of political things that get told to us in similar ways that, hey, this is great and this is awesome and this is amazing and look how good this is, even though there's other things that are pretty clearly bad and this and that, and not to wade into any of that and provide any sort of details. But it's a very similar thing, only now we have the internet and now we have thousands of people putting out stories like that may or may not be true, and they get a little bit muddled, and I think they're less effective that way. I think back then, you just had various local newspapers. um, you couldn't just go and be like, "I wonder if this story is true." Well, I'll think about it, and that's about it. You couldn't go to the internet and look up Snopes and look up whoever and look up whatever and ask Bill 5000's opinion on it on Reddit. But
Is that a real person?
I have no idea.
Okay, just checking. I thought you might be a big fan of Bill 5000. You seem like the type of person that would enjoy comedy from a man named Bill 5000.
It's a good name, Bill 5000. I mean, he's
You would love
5,000.
that. You'd be like, dude,
not
let's go
over
see
9,000.
Bill 5000
So.
at the Agora.
Well,
Well,
I
there is
think
a $5,000 bill, just to let everybody know.
That's Ulysses S. Grant Bill. Ulysses S.
Do
Grant
a
was
few
on
of
it.
those if anybody's
Yep,
looking to
a
donate.
Yeah, if
$5,000
anybody wants to
banknote.
donate a $5,000 bill to us, we would gladly
Hold on.
take.
My quick Google search tells me it features James Madison.
Oh, which one's Ulysses S. Grant?
I don't know. Let me look that up.
Maybe that's the 1K.
Or the 10K?
It could be.
Let's find out.
Good old Ulysses S. Grizzle.
But
He was
like
on
I
the
said,
$50 bill.
Really?
that's considerably less. That's unfair.
That's way less. I don't want that.
Poor guy.
You could donate that to us still, though. We'll take 50
Yeah, I'll
bucks.
take it.
50 bucks. Freedom Jobs the internet. $50 is $50.
Yeah, I think it was basically just meant to be a good rah rah. Look at all this great stuff, and we'll be able to throw off anything that comes our way in the future because maybe people needed that at the time. So
Maybe.
it was propaganda, but it was probably necessary propaganda again for the time and for the attitude of where people were at. It was
And you,
before the time when things were distinctively like propaganda was far more malicious. Like right now, we consider propaganda, especially from the 40s on, to be a lot more. When you think propaganda, it's always bad, whereas back then maybe it was kind of necessary.
I think propaganda is good and bad. It just depends what side of the fence you're on. If you're in one aspect, it's going to be good. If you're in another, it's going to be bad. I also would like to think, too, that if you sensationalize a story enough, people will follow it. People will be interested in it. And we're talking about a time, even if this is 1800s and it's fake, it's still a time when people didn't know anything about UFOs. People didn't know about, there wasn't 50,000 videos on YouTube and Reddit and everywhere else about UFOs. No, it was condensed. And to think that UFOs weren't thought of back then, I think is irresponsible, because people have been thinking of things in the sky for years, decades, millenniums even. So I think it all boils down to the fact that what we have to understand is you make it sound more fantastical with each telling, and it could have been a game of telephone. That's another thing we're not looking at here, is it could have been a game of he said she said. One person told it and then it ended up being a completely different thing by the time that it was over. So I think that's something we need to look at when we're dealing with these kind of conversations and topics. Is, did it start as a telephone game? Did it start as somebody saying, yeah, aliens, and then the next guy was like, aliens but they had a ship. Next guy, aliens but they had a ship but they had lasers. Aliens but they had a ship but they had lasers, and the lasers came out of their eyes, and it just keeps going until it gets more fanatical and fanatical, when maybe the whole concept of UFOs was England trying to come in and take, like aliens would take resources, and so they thought, you know what, let's make this crazy. Because I mean, let's be honest here. This is the 1800s or 1776, right? There's no internet. This is stuff you wouldn't hear about unless you knew people that knew this stuff, because this stuff wasn't ready available. It wasn't in the newspapers really much. It wasn't
The mail
in
system
hot
wasn't very
takes.
well developed yet.
No,
Like the mail system, the
no.
British had one in place for the colonies, but then
Yep.
when everything started getting the Revolutionary War, of course, all that fell apart,
Correct.
and you had separate supply lines for all that. So getting news around was notoriously slow.
And you have to think too, the printing press and all that, you got to run that factor past it too, because that's a whole nother. And then before the printing press, that's a whole nother. That's handwritten right there. And handwritten, could easily be turned into conjecture fairly quickly with enough people getting through their hands, or the telephone game is told, then wrote down after the telephone game has finished its conclusion. Now we're stretching into books and things like that. So they're going to write down the fantastical, and that doesn't even include the embellishments that were made by the person who wrote it. So that's a whole nother issue too, that what about the person that wrote it? They embellished it, they put their hot take in or whatever, what have you, and still you would still come up with something like this. I just think it's par for the course. If I had to be honest about it, I think that, it could be one big long game of telephone with some ufology attached,
But I just have to say, I think the biggest issue here is, before they invented the telephone, what did they call it? The game of telephone. What did they call that before the telephone existed?
Yeah, they probably called it like message relay, and then it's still relayed. But you got, if you got a whole battalion of men, unless you tell it to them right there And even then, if they retell it, they might add stuff
They're
on
all
their
going to
own
hear
to embellish
different
the
things
story.
too.
Possible, sure, sure, yep. Very possible, very possible. Spider, was that all?
That is the vision at Valley Forge. I have other things that we can talk about, but I don't want to take anybody else's thunder just yet. This is more for if we need to fill up some time at the end. I've got some other things. But in the meantime, I will pass the microphone, so to speak.
Go ahead, Steven. What do you got for us?
All right. I looked into now I'm sure I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but Faneuil Hall in Boston. And it is actually called the Cradle of Liberty. And I've
Ooh.
got about 5 little stories about hauntings that they had here. So the first one is a terrified slave woman. A female apparition in colonial era clothing is frequently seen peeking around corners at Ned Devine's, believed to be a Malagasy slave who was sold in Boston. And then the next one we're going to look into is the screams of Victor Hendrickson. Staff and patrons report hearing blood-curdling screams attributed to the 1907 death of Victor Hendrickson, who was killed by machinery at the site when it housed the Ames Plow Company. There is also reports of poltergeist activity, where objects such as salt and pepper shakers and beer kegs have been reported moving or rolling down hallways independently. And then the big one, the hall itself, as I mentioned before, is known as the Cradle of Liberty, is also said to harbor ghosts of patriots like Sam Adams and victims of the Boston Massacre, including Crispus Attucks. And there are also some nearby hauntings at the Granary Burying Ground, but we don't really need to get into those. We're focused on Faneuil Hall here. So which one did you think sounded the most interesting to get into first?
So I think Faneuil Hall is pretty interesting. We can dive into that one. Side note: I've been to Faneuil Hall,
Yeah,
so
nice.
it's pretty cool. Yeah, when I was in Boston in 2020, right before the thing hit, or 2021, yeah, 2021, right before the thing hit. So cool place, very interesting, very old. They have cemeteries in the city of Boston itself, like old style cemeteries, Revolutionary War cemeteries, big old gravestones, um, big old churches. So you could tell it's definitely a place of our forefathers. It's definitely not a. It's like if they took the era and the vibe of 1776, but then just dumped a giant city on top of it. That's
Yeah.
exactly what you would get because it still feels very old. I mean, you'll see
Mm.
like an Asian fusion restaurant, but then like a street down, you'll see a graveyard with graves from 1700s. So I think, yeah, start there.
Okay. I was thinking about it because it was Fallout 4. It was in Fallout.
Yeah, sure was.
Yep.
Good call.
All right. So the basic history behind the hauntings is the Faneuil Hall is deeply rooted in its dual history as both a birthplace of liberty and a hub for the slave trade. Yeah. While celebrated as the cradle of liberty, the hall was financed by Peter Faneuil, a wealthy merchant whose fortune was built on importing enslaved people from Madagascar and West Africa. The contradiction is central to the site's most persistent haunting, which is the terrified slave woman. The most frequently reported apparition is a woman in colonial era clothing, often seen frantically picking around corners, hiding within Ned Devine's pub. Witnesses describe an overwhelming sense of fear and desperation emanating from her, as you would expect. Historians and paranormal investigators believe she is the spirit of a Malagasy slave who was sold at this very location. Some legends suggest that she may have been attempting to escape her captors at the time of her death, forever trapped in a moment of terror. So, what do you guys think about that one?
I think what we're looking at here is we're looking at ghosts of America's past in these situations.
Mhm.
The places where these atrocities and things like that have happened tend to collect energy, and the energy just sits there, doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't move along, it just sits there and sort of corrupts the soil that which it sits. So I think when you see stuff like this, I think you're going to a have sort of sense of foreboding, and I think B it's sort of sense of historical impact on a specific site, that site being Faneuil Hall. And I think when we really sit down and look at it from a historical standpoint, it's easy to see how this place could have some paranormal traditions,
Yeah.
some activity, because like I said, because of the historic reverence, because of the historic situations that we find ourselves sitting in today, I think, yeah, that place could be. And then you have everything else that goes on around it. Like I said, it's not like the place isn't packed around there. Everything is. Boston's a crazy place. If you guys have never been to Boston, I recommend it. It's very much
Only in
an
Fallout.
interesting place. Take a Uber, do not drive, because driving's rough. But it's a cool city. I enjoyed it. I would go back. So, but that's what I think it is. I think it's
Yeah.
it's legend upon legend upon legend, and then that legend given validity, and that validity given life via the initial contact.
Like placebo effect.
Yes, kind of. And if we look at a place because it's like I said, like I always say, if I could take somebody that doesn't know anything about that area, doesn't know anything about Boston, and drop them in there, I would like to see if it still remains haunted.
Yeah. If
Don't
they
tell
have
the
the same
person
experience.
anything. Yes, because what if our experience is just based off prior knowledge rather than the experience itself? And our brain
Yeah.
is powerful enough to create something to happen. And so that thing happens, and we're like, oh, that's crazy. But if you're already of the mind and you already hear these things and you already hear what was going on at that time, does that invalidate the haunting or does it strengthen it? I think that's something that we have to look at in these situations. I don't think we can just sit back and um and not pay attention to what's going on. So
Yeah. Would you like to add anything, Spider?
I will concur that Boston definitely has a feeling of age to it. I was there many, many, many years ago for academic decathlon, I believe.
oh, smarty
Ooh,
pants. Okay,
fancy.
smarty pants. Fancy
Well, yeah,
smarty
that's
pants.
where I won my medals in economics. That's why I'm a
No,
smart
wait,
economics
wait,
guy.
wait, wait. Do you still have those medals?
Yeah,
Wear
yeah.
them next time we stream. Wear them.
I've got a gold in economics, which was the best I got. I got a
Oh,
silver, I think, in music, and I got bronzes in literature and something else, I think. I don't remember. I've got at least four. Economics was the big one. Like I was the person on the team that had the money smarts.
you need to
Um,
flex that like Kurt Angle did his gold medal. And they say if you leave milk and cookies out for Kurt Angle, he'll show up bald and ready to get rocking. So happy anniversary, America.
Kinky.
um, but from what I remember, there's a lot of brickwork, a lot of
Oh,
old red brickwork.
listen,
Like
brickwork a lot doesn't do that justice.
it's
There's
not
more than
in
a
the
lot.
buildings; it's in the roads, like the
The road.
cobblestone roads
Yep.
with the brick roads and all that. It's
And,
everywhere out
and
there. The
cobblestone's
sidewalks made out of
crazy.
brick.
You got to
Like
Crazy.
follow it.
it,
Yeah.
it's everywhere you go out there, and it's very
Yes.
dense. It's very close
It is.
because
Yep.
I know a lot of people seem to think, oh well, like New York City is so close and everything's all packed together, but Boston is a different level of that
Yeah.
because you have to remember how the city was made when we first settled here. It's that you were close together by necessity and for survival and for a whole bunch of other reasons. And then the city grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. The farther out you go, the more spread out it is. But when you're in the core of the city, everything is right next to everything else. And that can kind of contribute to kind of an atmosphere that spirits can be attracted to because they don't have to go very far between buildings, between places. If they were a person who lived, grew up, and died in a certain area, then they'll know all the buildings in that area and they can easily go between them, you would assume. And the other thing we have to remember too is just like many, I would probably say almost every single country on earth, we, not to get anybody controversial or anything, but we have had our own issues in the past, just like again, multiple countries in the world. Most countries of the world, unfortunately, have a history of some kind of slavery somewhere, at least most of the older countries. Certainly in Europe and in Africa. Africa had a very heavy slave trade among their own
And
countries.
don't forget Dan King.
You had in Asian countries. It's a very sobering point that these things we did carry a lot of that with us to the United States, unfortunately, and it took a long time to break out of that. So there's probably a lot of stories like this of somebody who was either fully a slave or an indentured servant or any variation of that, because there were different levels. You could be caught with a crime in England and then sent to the United States for relocation, and then you'd have to work for a wealthy family to work off your debt or your whatever. And if you ever left to go back to England, then they hung you.
Yes.
Um, because you weren't allowed to come back. You're
Nope.
exiled over there. You can
Yep.
fix your life for the better over there,
Yep.
but you aren't going to come back here. Once you're
Yes.
there, you do what you do, and if you can't be a good person, then they'll deal with you. And if you are a good person, well, make a life out there.
Yes.
Um, so there's a lot of levels to that, and some of the oldest places like Boston, Philadelphia, um, places in the Virginias, a lot of these places you're going to find stories like this where there are escaped, or not even escaped, just people who had been enslaved and they didn't manage to outlive their enslavement. And it's tragic, but it doesn't surprise me very much.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna put these next two right next to each other to kind of speed up the process a little bit. So next we're getting into the screams of Victor Hendrickson, and then we'll talk a little bit about Sam Adams. So beyond the colonial era, the site holds echoes of industrial tragedy as well. From 1862 to 1909, the space now occupied by Ned Devine's by Ned Devine's haunted areas, haunted house, essentially at this point. Uh, it was the Ames Plow Company. In 1907, a worker named Victor Hendrickson suffered a gruesome death when his vest became caught in a revolving shaft while he was fastening a screw on a ladder. According to contemporary reports from the Boston Globe, Hendrickson was partially dismembered with nearly every bone in his body broken or crushed. Staff and patrons today still report hearing blood-curdling screams echoing through the pub, believed to be a paranormal reenactment of his agonizing final moments. And then, really quickly, we also had a short story about Sam Adams. So, the main hall itself is apparently where Sam Adams and other patriots once rallied against British rule, and it is said to retain the intense emotional energy of the revolution, like Rob mentioned earlier about energies and, frequencies and vibrations and all that. And visitors and staff have reported unexplained footsteps on empty upper floors, heated voices arguing in 18th century cadences, and the lingering presence of founding fathers and victims of the Boston Massacre, such as Crispus Attucks. So I guess no serial killers are going to be finding any bones in their chocolate at the plow factory.
Mm.
Yep, I had to work that in
Mm.
before I gave
Mm.
you control. So, Rob, you go first. What have you got to say about these two?
So I think I think there's a certain love that we have as Americans for early early Americana, early American history, and the more um, paranormal, the better. I think the more paranormal, the better. I also like to think that people love sitting around just making up stories back then. People like
Yeah.
and like I said, it's a game of telephone. And you have somebody famous like Sam Adams and Christmas
They got to
Attic.
add to it.
That yeah, so you're gonna embellish. And who's to say they didn't see these things? Who's to say that these things aren't actually happening? Because once again, we have to understand that these are men who died for the country. You know, these are men who lived and bled the United States of America and what it was to become. And I think there's always going to be some supernatural attachment to people like this. Um, George Washington, there's a painting. It's called, it's his apotheosis. It's him going into the next life, but basically as himself. So it's a fascinating note. And I do like where it goes in terms of the patriotism that's involved in a lot of these stories. It's like America with ghosts. And I'm like, okay, I could see America with ghosts because we are those types of people. We are a very, well, at that time, we would have been a very superstitious type of people. We fled England. We're here. We're kicking English butt. The English throwing their tea in the harbor. We beat them so bad that we destroyed their taste buds, which is why they love beans on toast. We destroyed their taste buds. And so, you look at stuff like this and you want to give it a
I
sense
like
of
toast toppings.
embellishment. You want to give them a sense of embellishment. And I think it gives larger than life abilities to these people, like Washington having the visions, Sam Adams, paranormal style, it adds to the burgeoning legends of our forefathers. And I think it hits very well. I think both of those things are fantastic. I think what we need to do is take into account how much people didn't have anything to do back then, especially at night. Once them lights go out, you got some candles, right? So we'll just tell ghost stories about Sam Adams. When was this legend reported? Like when was
Uh,
the first telling of
let's see.
this tale of wonderment?
It actually doesn't tell me, but it said
Okay.
around the 18th century.
So what is that? Is that the
Hold up,
1900s or
hold
the
up.
1700s?
No,
Sorry.
that's 1700s.
That was Sam Adams. I don't have a date for
Oh.
the Sam Adams, but I do have for the Screams of Victor Hendrickson, the Plow Company dude. That happened in 1907, the first reporting of that one. That
Okay.
was when his death occurred, but we don't know when the first reporting happened.
Okay. So I think that once again, what we have to do is we have to take this all with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with these legends and the legends and lore that we are coming across, I think what we're doing to ourselves is we are pushing forth a better narrative about the paranormal aspect of our history, because that's intertwined, whether people want to believe it or not. The paranormal aspect of the United States is intertwined in its freedom. This is one of the few places where, ghost stories, UFOs, it's on regular TV. The news is on regular TV. I'm not saying other countries don't do this, but America loves it. America wants its disclosure. America loves freedom. So if it has disclosure and freedom, that's good to go. And you're adding a ghost to the mix, we're excited, because that's the American spirit. And anything you can attach to the American spirit in an ethereal form, you're going to hit the ball out of the park. And especially in that era now, 1900, if it was first reported, that's an interesting thing, because now you have to wonder how true that is, because 1900s is pretty late, pretty past the date of these things happening. When was that incident?
It says that he died in 1907.
Okay. So
2 years before the company closed down.
I still like to think that there's some fanatical aspects of it that are going on. I think the fantastical story is going to give us the drive and emotion to want to learn more about the paranormal. And I think, especially back then, because see, turn of the century, 18, what was it? Was it 19 what?
1907.
1907, early Americana. That means you have seances. That means you have a lot of occult stuff that was real popular back in Americana. So they just intertwined both. They said, we're going to do this legend about this guy, and it's going to be for freedom. So that's what I think they went off on, to be honest. Yeah.
Spider, anything to add?
This, as far as the stories afterwards, then you can go pretty much whichever way with that. I think an accident like that is believable around that time, because that was long before they put into place anything where they had worker protections and things of that nature.
Right.
Anything involving
no OSHA.
Yeah, and
Even
no
now they still
unions,
think
no
you work
nothing like
around
that.
Nothing.
There was, you still had a lot of child labor, you had a lot of that kind of stuff going on. So
It still happens today.
yeah, depending on where you're at and depending on where you go, a lot of people figure out how to get around those rules and things, unfortunately.
Have children.
But the thing about it is, again, they were unsafe environments, most likely, and it was something that probably, if it hadn't happened in different ways before, was bound to happen. And then once certain things happen a certain number of times, you start to get people telling stories about it, like, hey, you know what? this thing happened, and now he's haunting the place, and now he's gonna get you because you better not go back up there. Some of it was that people were afraid to do the work. Some of it was because, hey, I don't want to do that job. They ain't gonna get me to do it, so I'm gonna make up a ghost story. That way, they can't send me to do it because everybody's gonna be too afraid.
That was
Things like
your
that.
idea, right?
Yes.
That kind of thing would
That's
happen.
why he never did half the work when we worked together. He would just make up random ghost stories. He'd be like, "No, I refuse to build these ratchets because there's a ghost in the ratchet room." And I'd be and listen, I'm his homie, so to our detriment, I took the ship down with us. I said, "There's a lot of ghosts in there, guys. You need to get an exorcist in there ASAP, ASAP." And like that's what he would do. He would flee that room. He'd be like, "Oh my god, the ghosts are here to get me!" And I don't know why he talked like that because he doesn't talk like that. But at the time, he was like, "Please don't get me, spooky
I
ghost
had a
people."
cold.
Yeah. And I would come in and be like, "Hey there, buddy. Are you doing all right?" And he'd be like, "Not really." I'd be like, "Let's get out of here before the ghosts get us." And then you had to play some music because somebody asked you to, and then you look at them and you said, "No, no, we're not playing that dumpster fire music." So,
Coincidentally,
fair enough.
it is the anniversary, the 12-year anniversary of that place giving me a permanent back injury. So, that's nice.
Oh, is it like to the day?
Yeah, it happened today,
Man,
12 years ago.
good for you, bro. I
Great, I'm
couldn't be
happy
more
about
proud
it.
of you. Listen, I'd be
The
thrilled.
legacy I got from that place. I'm so pleased.
And listen, it's the gift that keeps on giving, really,
I
because
know every day.
you never know when things could go awry with your back. Thanks, Sears. You did us
I could
good. You
twist
really
like
did.
this, and then my back goes
Oh,
out.
oh,
I can put
and then
this down. Oh, there goes my back.
there it goes. And then guess what? You're stuck on the show like that. And then I'm
So
just going to
now
leave the show up so you can't move, and we just do a whole like 24-hour stream of you trying to
I
fix
now
your
can
back.
empathize with this guy who got injured on the job, and although I was not killed and I'm not haunting anybody right now, it could have
As far as
happened.
we know.
Maybe that's you from a previous life.
Mhm.
It makes sense. Those evil cookies you eat, you're a witch.
But anyway, moving on. Yeah, I think it was definitely something that could have happened, and whether or not the haunting happened afterwards, who knows? But I'd be interested to visit the place myself in the future and
Yeah.
take stock myself.
All right. That was all I had.
Spider, we got a little bit of time left. What was the one thing that you had that you were looking to bring up? Because I was just going to talk about UFOs in the 1950s and how it was one of the largest UFO sightings in July. But there's nothing really patriotic about it. There's no like. The only thing it was is it was just in
Unless
DC.
America was founded by aliens.
Maybe, maybe. Who knows? The Pleiadians or the lizard people or the Nordics
Come on, you would
or
be surprised. I can make anything related to anything else.
I don't you're a person who hasn't slept in months. I don't deny that at all.
Well, I have another story about a boat.
Oh, it's Boatman.
No,
Mr. Boatman.
Mr.
But this
Boatman,
isn't
he's
one we
back.
got to go find. This one
Boatman is
isn't lost
back.
somewhere. This isn't one we got to go find. It's not been lost.
Oh, and his boat stories are the worst.
Well,
Start
this one's
calling him
gruesome.
Captain
This one's
Phillips.
super gruesome. This is about the HMS Jersey. The
I've
HMS
heard an
Jersey was it was a British ship that they were going to decommission around the time of the Revolutionary War. They took the masts off. They basically just parked it somewhere like we're going to tear it down at some point. But during the war, they had a problem. They needed places to keep all of the prisoners that they were taking of the Americans because for some reason the Americans kept raiding the ones that they had on land and freeing all their buddies over and over and over again. So
sounds very American. Sounds way American.
what they did was they had a fleet of these ships. The HMS Jersey was just one of them, where they would just put them off in the harbor, fill them with as many political prisoners and captured Americans as they could, and that's where they kept them all the time. They would feed them there, they would just stack them in, and that's where you spent as much of the war as you could until you basically died. And at one point, um, let's see. At one point, 12,000 prisoners had died among 16 of these ships that they had out there, which compares to the 6,800 that they had actually killed in battle. So 12,000 people didn't even die in battle to the British. They were put on these boats, stacked in, and they died that way.
Oof.
There wasn't a lot of air. There wasn't a lot of water. There was lice. There was rats. It was absolutely horrible conditions. Okay. Now the HMS Jersey was the worst. It had the most casualties daily. According to reports, there was an average of 6 to 8 bodies removed from the boat every day, and they would take them, row them to shore, and bury them shallow graves in the sand.
Oh,
And the graves were shallow enough that sometimes when the tide would come in and the wind would blow, it would uncover the bodies, and you'd have bones and stuff just sticking out there. Pretty gruesome.
Nobody tells Scruffy.
Um, Now, eventually, after the war, of course, all these ships were decommissioned, taken apart. Like it was just, we're getting rid of them all. In October of 1902, while extending one of the docks, this was at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, one of the laborers pierced the sunken hull of the burned out Jersey. Because what the British did is they burned all the ships and let them sit when they were leaving. Apparently, people reported that from the burned out hull, there was a foul and ominous stench,
of course.
which stands to reason. And after that, apparently to this day, if you go to the area, there's a memorial set up. Eventually, the city set up a memorial for the lives that were lost and all that other kind of thing. To this day, there's reports of faint whispers near the water, which is an interesting thing. On the one hand, it's near the water, and water itself can kind of sound like whispering. It was just, the white noise on the shore, that kind of stuff. It plays tricks with your ears, that kind of thing.
I've not once heard water at a shore, and I've been to a lot of places with water, and not once was there like water doesn't sound like that. Has it sounded like that to you?
That might be schizophrenia.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying it's
you
white
might- you might-
noise. You
You
get
might
that
want to get your segment.
shushing sound from the white
Wow,
noise.
white
So,
noise. Wow.
but that's what they say,
Candy bars.
and that's the story of the HMS Jersey.
I think it's interesting because a lot of people don't understand that there was a lot of brutality in the Revolutionary War. But we don't think about that because we think of things like Washington crossing the Delaware, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, all the people involved, but nobody thinks because with the Civil War, you have places like Andersonville, right, where there was craziness happening. World War I, World War II, crazy battles, trench warfare in World War I. It's like horrible conditions. You don't think about the Revolutionary War. You just don't. When it comes to those kind of things, you don't think about it because you're too busy thinking about freedom. And I don't say that jokingly, but when you think of the Revolutionary War, that's what you think of. You don't think of men dying. He does. I don't. But it's not as the atrocity as the rest of the wars were, even though atrocities happened, because they don't get reported a lot. You know, like I said, the Revolutionary War, it's just, hey, guerrillas versus, because people don't understand, the British were very civil in their warfare. We were not. We
It was
said,
still
nah,
old style. You lined up,
yeah,
you
and
took
you
your
took shots.
shots, reloaded. They took shots, reloaded, and that's how you wore each other down for attrition. And the Americans didn't do that. They're like, nah, we're gonna learn what we learned from the Native Americans here about
Yes.
hiding in the trees, about hiding
Yep.
in the leaves,
Yep.
the tall grass, that kind of thing. We're to
Yep.
take you out where we can see you, and then we're gonna run off. And
Yes.
the British were not at all prepared.
They were
for
like,
any
"Hey,
of that.
where are you going? Don't you run away from me. You get back here and let me shoot at you, and then I'll take 15, 20 minutes to load me musket, and then I'm going to shoot at you, and you can shoot at me, and when one of us dies, one of us dies." Could you imagine being the worst aim of the bunch? That'd be terrible. But see, that's the thing is we said, no, we're going to stay in the trees, and when you go by, we're going to jump on you. And a lot of the officers thought we were savages. But like you said, we just took what we knew from the people there and we just said, you know what? We're going to do that too. What are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. We're literally destroying your army piece by piece because we're jumping out of trees, because we're coming out of cornfields, because we're coming out of hiding places. No, I'm not going to meet you on a giant battlefield and we stand there and just shoot at each other until somebody says, okay, I'm ready to come to terms. No. Fisticuffs. No, I think not. Revolver shots. That's what it was. It was the musket shot, but it was the musket shot that wasn't seen until you were pretty much dead. I like it.
Shot that wasn't seen around the world.
It's kind of like it's like that scene from Indiana Jones where the guy's doing the swords. He's like, and he's just like, bong.
Yeah, he was like, I know, I ain't got time to play this nonsense.
That's how we do things here.
That is how we do things. So that's what I think. That's what I think. Interesting episode tonight. Happy 250th anniversary, America. Freedom, jobs, and the internet. Any final thoughts from the two of you?
I don't like fireworks.
It's like they make me scared and they keep me awake.
We celebrate our freedom, but
you don't like anything.
Huh?
He doesn't like anything. Oh. It's not even just fireworks. He don't like nothing. You're like, hey, and he's like, I don't like it. You're like, I didn't say
I like
nothing.
This beer. I like that.
It's not even American. That's the funniest part about that. Mm-hmm. It's like, whatever. No, I'm kidding.
Bought it in America.
I get it though. I get it. Steven, any final thoughts?
While America is celebrating their freedom, don't forget all the other people that don't have freedom.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, because there's people that don't. Anyways, had a great conversation with you gentlemen. It was a blast. I had fun. I know you guys had fun. Join us next week for some more shenanigans. Happy birthday, America. And we love you guys. Thank you all for tuning in for another amazing episode of This Uncanny Era. Join us next week for more shenanigans. Be safe. I hope all of you have your four fingers and your thumb tomorrow. People, please keep your hands. Somebody see he lost. Oh, you trickster. You're such a. Oh, look at this one. He's a trickster too. Oh, look at that. Where'd mine go? I don't even have any. Mine are gone.
All gone. See your knuckles right there.
Shut your mouth. You didn't see anything. Thank you both for the conversation. Had a blast. Thank you, chat. Had a blast talking with you. Happy America, freedom, jobs, the internet, hamburgers and guns. Have a good one, people. And as always, why be boring when you can be a freedom person? Until then, which is next week, take care and have a good night. See you later.